The granite and glass tower of Thompson Enterprises cast long shadows over downtown Portland as the sun began its descent. Inside the penthouse office on the 47th floor, Alexander Thompson sat alone, surrounded by awards, accolades, and absolutely no one who cared. Sometimes the weight of success feels heavier than failure. Drop a heart emoji if you've ever felt completely alone despite everything you've achieved. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky as Alexander Thompson's custom Italian loafers clicked across the polished marble floor of his executive suite. At 45, he commanded an empire worth billions, but the expansive view from his floor-to-ceiling windows only emphasized the vast emptiness of his personal life. "Cancel my dinner with the foundation board," Alexander instructed his virtual assistant through his smartwatch. "Tell them I'll triple my usual donation instead." He didn't bother waiting for a confirmation response. After 15 years of giving orders, he expected nothing less than immediate compliance. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, distinguished silver streaks at his temples contrasting with the deep brown of his hair, a jawline that still remained sharp despite the years, and eyes that hadn't truly brightened with genuine joy in longer than he cared to remember. Cleo, his silver-grey Weimaraner, padded silently to his side, pressing against his leg in a gesture that needed no words. The dog's companionship was the only consistent relationship Alexander maintained outside of business associates and service staff. "Just you and me tonight, girl," he murmured, his voice softening as he reached down to scratch behind her ears. Tees, Thompson penthouse apartment, sprawled across 9,000 square feet of prime real estate in the most exclusive building in Portland. Original artwork worth millions adorned walls that had never known the touch of children's hands. Furniture, selected by the city's most sought-after designer, sat largely unused in perfectly arranged groupings. Every surface gleamed with the attentions of his housekeeper, Ms. Reynolds, but nothing about the space suggested that anyone truly lived there. "Mr. Thompson," Ms. Reynolds called from the kitchen entrance, "I've prepared your dinner and left it in the refrigerator. Just heat it for 3 minutes when you're ready." Her tone remained professional, despite the decade she'd spent in his employment. Alexander nodded dismissively, but something on the kitchen counter caught his eye. A colorful card with childish handwriting propped against a vase of fresh flowers. "What's that?" he asked, gesturing toward the card. Miss Reynolds smiled, her stern features momentarily softening. "My granddaughter made it for me. She just started first grade." Alexander found himself walking closer, picking up the card with its uneven letters and stick-figure drawing. "You have grandchildren?" he asked, though they'd never discussed personal matters before. "3 of them now," Ms. Reynolds replied, her face transforming with unmistakable pride. "Madison's the youngest at 6. That's from her first day of school. Celebration last week." Something flickered across Alexander's expression, a shadow of emotion so brief that Ms. Reynolds almost missed it. "Was it longing? Regret? You should put that away," he said, returning to his usual detached tone. "And lock up when you leave." After Miss Reynolds departed, the vastness of the penthouse seemed to expand around Alexander, the silence broken only by the occasional shifting of Cleo's position on her designer dog bed. He poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch, not bothering to appreciate its rarity or flavor as he drank it mechanically. His phone buzzed with messages from business associates, board members, his executive assistant with tomorrow's schedule, but nothing from anyone who simply wanted to know how his day had been or if he was doing well. As dusk settled over the city, Alexander clipped Cleo's leash to her collar and headed for the private elevator that would take them directly to the street level, without having to interact with other residents of the building. Their evening walk was the only routine in Alexander's life, not dictated by business necessities. The October chill cut through his cashmere coat, but Alexander barely noticed, his mind already calculating tomorrow's meetings, mapping out strategic acquisitions, and planning his next corporate takeover. He had built Thompson Enterprises from a small tech startup to a global conglomerate by being ruthlessly efficient and uncompromising in his vision. People feared him in boardrooms. His competitors dreaded hearing his company was interested in their market space. He had earned a reputation for being brilliant, exacting, and emotionally detached, qualities that had served him well professionally but left him profoundly isolated personally. As they approached Madison Park, Cleo tugged gently at her leash, eager to reach her favorite walking spot. The park was typically empty this late on a weeknight, exactly how Alexander preferred it. The occasional jogger or fellow dog walker knew better than to attempt conversation with the notorious businessman. The park lamps cast pools of light along the winding paths, creating alternating sections of illumination and shadow. The last of the autumn leaves crunched beneath his feet, nature's reminder of inevitable change and loss. An unfamiliar melancholy washed over Alexander as the city lights twinkled in the distance. The image of Miss Reynolds' grandchild's card lingered in his mind. When was the last time anyone had created something just for him? When was the last time he'd experienced the simple joy of being important to someone, not because of his wealth or position, but simply because of who he was? Alexander shook his head, banishing the thought. He had chosen this path deliberately. Wealth, power, independence, these were the values he had prioritized. He didn't need the complications of deep, personal relationships. He didn't need anyone, but as Cleo trotted ahead on the path, leading Alexander deeper into Madison Park, fate was preparing to challenge everything the wealthy man believed about himself and the empire he had built. Little did he know that what awaited him on this cool October evening would shatter the carefully constructed walls around his heart and force him to confront the true cost of his success. They rounded a bend in the path, and Cleo suddenly tensed, her ears perking forward with interest, her attention fixed on a park bench, partially hidden by the shadows of a massive oak tree. "Cleo, heel!" Alexander commanded, but for perhaps the first time since he'd trained her, the Weimaraner ignored him. Instead, she pulled toward the bench with purpose, her tail beginning to wag slightly. Alexander squinted through the darkness. There was something, or someone, small, huddled on the bench. As they drew closer, he could make out a child sitting, alone, shoulders hunched against the evening chill, concentrating intently on something in her small hands. "Hey!" Alexander called out sharply, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used in executive meetings. "Where are your parents? Do you know what time it is?" The figure startled and looked up. In the dim glow of the nearest park lamp, Alexander found himself looking at a young girl, no more than 8 years old. Her clothes were clean but visibly worn, her sandy brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face showing signs of recent tears despite her attempt to appear. Composed. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Cleo had already reached the bench, and to Alexander's astonishment, gently placed her head on the girl's knee, in a gesture of comfort he'd only seen his dog offer to him before. The girl hesitantly patted Cleo's head, and a small smile briefly transformed her solemn expression. "She doesn't usually approach strangers," Alexander said, more to himself than to the child. "Dogs can tell when people are sad." The girl replied simply, continuing to stroke Cleo's sleek head. "What's her name?" "Cleo," Alexander answered, finding himself moving closer. "Where are your parents? It's almost 9 o'clock on a school night." The girl clutched something tightly in her small fist. "My mom is working late. She works at the hospital cafeteria. Alexander frowned, studying the child with growing concern. Even in the dim light, he could see her shoulders trembling slightly. In the October chill, though, she tried to hide it, and she left you here, in the park, alone. He couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. The girl shook her head. No, sir. I was supposed to stay with Mrs. Winters next door, but she got sick, and Mom couldn't find anyone else on short notice. I wanted to go to the hospital to be with Mom, but I missed the bus. Something about her direct gaze and matter-of-fact explanation gave Alexander pause. There was a dignity in her demeanor that seemed far beyond her years. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softer than before. "Emma," she replied. "Emma Wright." She extended her hand with surprising formality, as though they were meeting at a business function rather than a dark park on an October night. Alexander hesitated before taking her small hand in his. It was ice cold. Alexander Thompson. Emma's eyes widened slightly. "Like the Thompson building downtown? My teacher told us you built it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Alexander felt a jolt of recognition, not for his wealth or status, but for the simple fact that this child knew who he was, while he knew nothing about her. "Yes, that's right," he confirmed, uncomfortable, with the strange feeling settling in his chest. "Are you calling someone to take me away?" Emma asked quietly, a hint of resignation in her voice. The question caught Alexander off guard. "Take you away? You mean the police or child services?" Emma nodded, eyes suddenly wary. She clutched her small fist tighter. Alexander should call authorities. That would be the responsible thing to do. A child alone in a park after dark was clearly a case for social services. And yet Cleo had settled herself protectively beside Emma, her head still resting in the girl's lap, as though they were old friends. His normally aloof Weimaraner looked up at him with an expression that seemed almost accusatory. "When did you last eat something, Emma?" Alexander found himself asking instead. "Lunch at school," she answered honestly. "I was saving this for later." She uncurled her fingers slightly, revealing a crumpled $1 bill, clearly a treasure to her. "That's your only money?" Alexander asked, struggling to keep his voice neutral. Emma nodded. "Mom gave it to me for emergency milk at school. Tomorrow," but she trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "I can skip milk for one day. It's okay." Something shifted inside Alexander Thompson. The man who closed billion-dollar deals without blinking felt something crack in his carefully constructed armor. The sight of this child, alone in the cold, with nothing but $1 to her name, yet still maintaining such dignity, affected him in ways he couldn't articulate. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. The responsible action would be to call authorities immediately, yet something made him hesitate as he looked at Emma's resigned expression. "I'm going to call the police," he finally said, dialing the number, "but only so they can help us find your mum and make sure you're safe." Emma nodded quietly, her small shoulders slumping slightly. "She's not in trouble, is she? She works really hard. She doesn't have anyone to help her since Dad died." Alexander paused mid-dial, another piece of information settling heavily on him. "No, Emma, she's not in trouble," he assured her, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Within 15 minutes, a patrol car pulled up at the park entrance, its lights casting blue and red patterns through the trees. Officer Rachel Wilson approached them, flashlight in hand. "Evening, Mr. Thompson," the officer said, recognizing him immediately. "One of the burdens of being the city's most prominent business figure." "I found this child alone in the park," Alexander explained, gesturing to Emma. "She says her mother is working at the hospital cafeteria and that her childcare arrangement fell through." Officer Wilson crouched down to Emma's level, her demeanor softening. "Hello there. What's your name, sweetie?" "Emma Wright," she answered politely. "Wright? Officer Wilson's eyebrows rose in recognition. "Are you Melissa Wright's daughter? From Portland General?" Emma nodded, surprised to be recognized. "You know her family?" Alexander asked, confused by this unexpected connection. "I volunteer at the community center near Portland General sometimes," Wilson explained. "Melissa brings Emma to the after-school programs when she can afford it." She turned back to Emma. "Where's your mom tonight, sweetheart?" "Working late shift. They asked for volunteers and it pays extra," Emma explained. "Mom said we need the money for rent this month." Officer Wilson sighed, pulling out her phone. "I'll call the hospital and have them locate her. In the meantime," she glanced at her watch, "it's nearly 10 o'clock. I'll need to arrange temporary placement for tonight." "Placement?" Emma asked, her voice small but steady. "Just until we reach your mom," Wilson assured her. "Unfortunately, this late at night, it would likely be the emergency children's shelter downtown." Alexander pictured the shelter. His foundation donated substantially to it for tax purposes, but he'd never actually visited. The thought of Emma spending the night there among strangers made him inexplicably uncomfortable. "Is that necessary?" The words left his mouth before he could consider them fully. "It's just for one night." Both Officer Wilson and Emma looked at him with surprise. "She could—" Alexander hesitated, hardly believing what he was about to suggest. "She could stay at my residence until her mother is located. I have plenty of room, and my housekeeper could return to assist if needed." Officer Wilson studied him carefully. "That's unusually generous, Mr. Thompson, but there are protocols for child welfare cases." "I understand," Alexander interrupted, "but you know who I am, Officer Wilson, my reputation in this city. Surely one night won't hurt while you locate her mother." After a lengthy phone consultation with her sergeant and taking down Alexander's information, Officer Wilson reluctantly agreed, making it clear she would be personally checking in first thing in the morning. As they walked toward the park exit, Emma stumbled slightly from exhaustion. Without thinking, Alexander extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Emma took it, her small fingers curling around his with surprising strength. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd held anyone's hand. The simple human contact sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Thank you," Emma said quietly as they reached his car. "Cleo seems happy I'm coming with you." Indeed, the Weimaraner was walking with an almost prancing step, as if she'd orchestrated this entire situation. "It's just for tonight," Alexander clarified, as much to himself as to her, "until they reach your mother." Emma nodded solemnly. "I understand. I won't be any trouble." As Alexander helped her into his luxury SUV, catching his reflection in the tinted window, the face staring back at him seemed unfamiliar, uncertain, concerned, and utterly out of his depth. What had he just gotten himself into? The grandeur of the Thompson penthouse seemed to shrink Emma even further as they stepped off the private elevator. Her eyes widened, taking in the soaring ceilings, modern artwork, and panoramic city views. "This is where you live?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander nodded, suddenly seeing his home through her eyes. It was impressive, certainly. Expensive, undoubtedly. But was it a home? "Are you hungry?" he asked, realizing he had no idea how to care for a child. Emma nodded hesitantly. "A little." In the kitchen, Alexander stared blankly at his refrigerator. Miss Reynolds had left his prepared dinner, some elaborate salmon dish, but nothing suitable for a child. He reheated some pasta from the previous night and placed it before Emma, who sat at the massive kitchen island, looking like a dollhouse figurine in a real house. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said politely, taking small, careful bites as if savoring every morsel. The silence felt oppressive. Alexander had no idea how to talk to a child. "So, what grade are you in?" he attempted. "Third," Emma answered between bites. "I like math and science best." "Math and science?" Alexander echoed, remembering his own childhood affinity for numbers and systems. That's very practical. Good career options. Emma shrugged. Mum says I should study what makes me happy, and the rest will follow. But she also says a good education is the one thing nobody can take away from you. Alexander felt another unexpected twist in his chest. Wisdom from a struggling cafeteria worker that he, with all his MBA training and business success, had never considered. After dinner, he showed Emma to one of the 5 unused guest bedrooms, finding new toothbrushes in a drawer and awkwardly explaining how to adjust. The rainfall shower. He waited in the hallway, listening to ensure she didn't need help, feeling completely outside his element. When Emma emerged wearing one of his T-shirts as a makeshift nightgown, the smallest thing he could find, her face freshly washed and hair damp, she surprised him by wrapping her arms around his waist in a quick hug. "Thank you for helping me, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice muffled against his cashmere sweater. Alexander froze, his hands suspended in midair. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him spontaneously. Slowly, stiffly, he patted her shoulder. "You're welcome," he managed. "Get some sleep. We'll sort everything out tomorrow." Later, as Alexander sat in his home office with a glass of scotch, he noticed a small bulge in the pocket of Emma's jacket, which he'd hung up in the hallway. Curious, he investigated and found a worn photograph of a smiling woman with Emma's same warm brown eyes standing beside a man in military uniform. On the back was written, "Mom, Dad, and me at Fort Lewis, 2019. Something about their expressions, genuine happiness unmarred by pretense, struck him as both foreign and achingly familiar. He carefully returned the photo to Emma's pocket. As he passed her room on the way to his own bedroom, he heard muffled crying. Alexander paused, his hand raised to knock, then lowered it, paralyzed by his own emotional inadequacy. What could he possibly say to comfort this child? Instead, he slid down against the wall outside her door, sitting on the floor in his $3,000 suit pants, listening helplessly as Emma cried herself to sleep. For the first time in decades, Alexander Thompson, CEO and founder of Thompson Enterprises, whose net worth exceeded $9 billion, felt completely powerless. And strangely, that powerlessness awakened something long dormant inside him, a capacity for empathy he'd buried beneath years of boardroom battles and relentless ambition. As silence finally fell in Emma's room, Alexander made his way to his own bedroom, knowing sleep would elude him tonight. Something fundamental had shifted in his carefully controlled world, and there would be no going back to the man he had been just hours before. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thompson penthouse, finding Alexander, sitting at his kitchen island, phone in hand, hair uncombed, a state in which his business associates would never have recognized him. He had barely slept, his mind churning with thoughts of the small girl sleeping in his guest room and the circumstances that had brought her to his door. He'd made several calls already, to Ms. Reynolds, asking her to come in early, to his executive assistant, instructing her to clear his schedule, and to Officer Wilson, checking for updates on locating Emma's mother. The soft padding of bare feet on marble made him look up. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, Cleo at her side, as if she'd appointed herself the child's personal guardian. The Weimaraner, normally aloof with everyone except Alexander, had apparently switched her primary allegiance overnight. "Good morning," Emma said quietly, her oversized borrowed T-shirt making her look even smaller. "Good morning," Alexander replied, suddenly unsure of protocol. What did children eat for breakfast? "Are you hungry?" Emma nodded, climbing carefully onto one of the high kitchen stools. "Is there any cereal?" she asked hopefully. Alexander frowned. "I don't think so. I usually have a protein shake or Ms. Reynolds makes an egg white omelette." Emma's face fell slightly, but she quickly recovered. "That's okay. Anything is fine." The elevator chimed, announcing Miss Reynolds' arrival. The housekeeper stopped short when she saw Emma sitting at the kitchen island. "Mr. Thompson?" she questioned, her professional demeanor momentarily slipping. "Miss Reynolds, this is Emma," Alexander explained briefly. "She'll be our guest until we locate her mother. There was a situation last night." To her credit, Miss Reynolds adjusted quickly. "Well then, good morning, young lady. Would you like some breakfast? I can make pancakes." Emma's face brightened. "Yes, please, can I help?" As Emma assisted Miss Reynolds with measuring flour and cracking eggs, Alexander stepped away to take a call from Officer Wilson. "We've located Melissa Wright," Wilson informed him. "She's frantic with worry. Apparently, she arranged for a neighbor to watch Emma, but there was a miscommunication. When she called to check in last night and discovered Emma wasn't there, she's been searching ever since." "Why didn't she call the police?" Alexander asked, watching Emma carefully pour milk into a measuring cup. "Pride, most likely," Wilson replied. "Ms. Wright has had previous interactions with social services due to childcare challenges. Single parents in her situation often fear losing custody if they appear unable to provide adequate supervision." Alexander felt a twinge of something unfamiliar. Empathy, perhaps. He'd never considered the impossible choices people with limited resources had to make. "I'd like to meet with her," he said decisively. "Can you bring her here instead of us bringing Emma to the station?" Wilson paused. "That's unusual, Mr. Thompson." "I'm aware," he replied. "But I think it would be less traumatic for Emma this way." After hanging up, Alexander returned to the kitchen, where Emma was now sitting at the counter with a stack of blueberry pancakes in front of her. "These are amazing," she declared, offering him a genuine smile for the first time. "Ms. Reynolds is a way better cook than my mum, but don't tell her I said that." Alexander found himself smiling back, the expression feeling foreign on his face. "It'll be our secret," he promised, accepting a plate from Miss Reynolds with a nod of thanks. As they ate, Alexander studied Emma surreptitiously. In daylight, the signs of her precarious circumstances were more evident. Her clothes, though clean and carefully mended, were clearly well worn. Her sneakers had been colored in with marker where the white had turned gray. Her watchful eyes carried a wariness no 8-year-old should possess. "Officer Wilson called," he said gently. They found your mum. Emma's fork clattered against her plate. "Is she mad? Is she okay?" "She's been looking for you all night," Alexander assured her. "She'll be coming here soon." Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, but her expression remained guarded. "Are we in trouble?" Alexander shook his head. "No one is in trouble. These things happen." After breakfast, Miss Reynolds helped Emma wash up and change back into her clothes. While they were occupied, Alexander wandered into his home office, finding himself drawn to a framed photograph he normally paid little attention to, himself. As a child, standing beside his father outside the small repair shop where they had lived in the apartment above. Before Thompson Enterprises, before the billions and the penthouse, there had been Alexander and his father scraping by after his mother left. His father had worked 16-hour days to keep him fed and clothed. How had he forgotten those early years of struggle? The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Alexander emerged from his office to find Officer Wilson at the door with a woman who could only be Emma's mother. Melissa Wright was perhaps in her early 30s, though stress and exhaustion had etched premature lines around her eyes. She wore a hospital cafeteria uniform, her sandy brown hair, the same shade as Emma's, pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mr. Thompson," Officer Wilson began formally, "this is Melissa Wright, Emma's mother." Before Alexander could speak, Emma came tearing down the hallway. "Mom!" she cried, flinging herself into her mother's arms. Melissa caught her daughter, holding her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Emma, thank God. I've been so worried. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm okay, Mom, Emma assured her. Mr. Thompson took care of me. And Cleo, too. That's his dog. Melissa looked up, meeting Alexander's gaze over her daughter's head. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to repay you for taking care of her. Alexander felt oddly uncomfortable with her gratitude. There's nothing to repay. Emma was very well behaved. Officer Wilson cleared her throat. I've explained the situation to Ms. Wright. Under the circumstances, no reports will be filed with Child Protective Services, but I've suggested some resources for emergency childcare. Melissa nodded, relief evident on her face. I'm eternally grateful, Officer Wilson. This won't happen again. Alexander gestured toward the living area. Please, sit down. Would you like some coffee? Water? The formality of the invitation seemed to remind Melissa of where she was and who she was addressing. Her spine straightened as she took in the opulence surrounding them. No, thank you. We've imposed enough. We should be going. She took Emma's hand. Get your things, sweetie. Just your jacket, Emma, Alexander said. It's by the door. As Emma went to retrieve her jacket, an awkward silence fell between the adults. Alexander had navigated billion-dollar negotiations with ease, but found himself at a loss for words with this exhausted cafeteria worker. Emma mentioned you work at Portland General, he finally said. Melissa nodded. In the cafeteria, 5 years now. Night shifts often. When I can get them. They pay a differential, and Emma's usually asleep anyway. Melissa hesitated. Mr. Thompson, I want you to know I'm a good mother. Last night was unusual circumstances. My regular sitter had an emergency, and Mrs. Winters next door said she could watch Emma, but then she got sick, and I couldn't reach anyone else. You don't need to explain, Alexander interrupted gently, surprising himself with his tone. I understand difficult choices. Something in his voice must have conveyed sincerity, because Melissa's defensive posture eased slightly. Thank you. Not everyone does, Emma returned, pulling on her jacket. As she reached into the pocket, her expression changed to one of concern. Mom, I still have my $1. I didn't spend it. Melissa knelt down. That's good, honey. You can use it for milk today. Emma shook her head, her expression suddenly determined. No, I want to give it to Mr. Thompson. Alexander blinked in surprise. What? No, Emma, you keep that. You might need it. But Emma was already approaching him, the crumpled dollar bill extended in her small hand. You helped me when I was scared and alone. Mom says we always thank people who help us, even if we don't have much. Alexander stared at the worn dollar bill, probably the only money this child had to her name, being offered to him, a man whose daily investment fluctuations exceeded millions. Emma, I can't take your only $1, he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Please, Emma insisted. It's important. When Dad was alive, he said a gift with meaning is worth more than one that costs a lot. The mention of her father, the man in the military uniform from the photograph, hit Alexander unexpectedly hard. Before he could respond, Emma pressed the dollar into his palm and closed his fingers around it. Something broke inside Alexander. Thompson, in that moment, a dam that had held back emotions for decades. To his horror and Emma's wide-eyed surprise, tears began to spill down his cheeks. Mr. Thompson? Emma asked, alarmed. Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? Alexander shook his head, unable to speak as years of suppressed emotions surged through him. This child with nothing was offering him her only $1. Not out of pity, but out of genuine gratitude and a moral code that recognized the importance of acknowledging kindness. When was the last time anyone had offered him anything that wasn't motivated by self-interest or professional gain? Melissa stepped forward, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder, clearly unsure how to respond to the sight of one of the city's most powerful men weeping in his luxury penthouse over a crumpled dollar bill. "We should go, Emma," she said quietly. "Mr. Thompson is very busy and you need to get to school." "But he's crying," Emma protested. "Did I make him sad?" Alexander finally found his voice, though it emerged rough with emotion. "No, Emma, you didn't make me sad. You just reminded me of something I'd forgotten for a very long time." "What did I remind you of?" Emma asked, her curiosity overcoming her concern. Alexander looked at the dollar in his hand, then at this remarkable child and her mother, who had sacrificed so much to raise her with values money couldn't buy. "That the most valuable things in life," he said softly, "aren't things at all. Mr. Thompson." Ms. Reynolds' voice broke through the emotional moment, her professional demeanor tinged with concern. "Your 9 o'clock video conference began 5 minutes ago. The board is waiting." Alexander wiped his eyes, embarrassed by his uncharacteristic display. The Thompson Enterprises board, 12 of the sharpest business minds in the country, was undoubtedly growing impatient. Any other day, keeping them waiting would have been unthinkable. Today, somehow, it seemed trivial. "Tell them something." "Came up," he said, surprising even himself. "Reschedule for tomorrow." Ms. Reynolds blinked, visibly startled. In 15 years, Alexander Thompson had never postponed a board meeting. "Yes, sir," she replied, retreating to make the call. "We really should go," Melissa said, clearly uncomfortable. "You have important things to do." Alexander looked at the dollar bill still clutched in his hand, then at Emma and her mother. "Actually, I think this is the important thing today." He knelt down to Emma's level. "Would you like to see where I work before you go to school?" "If your mom agrees, of course." Emma's eyes widened. "In the big Thompson building downtown? The really tall one?" Alexander nodded. "The very same. We could have breakfast in the executive dining room. They make excellent chocolate chip pancakes." He glanced up at Melissa. "That is, if it wouldn't make you too late for school." Melissa hesitated, checking her watch. "I have to get to my shift soon, and Emma's already missed her morning classes." "I can arrange transportation for both of you afterward," Alexander offered, "and I'll personally call Emma's school to explain the circumstances." "Please, Mom?" Emma pleaded. "I've never been in a skyscraper before." Melissa relented with a small smile. "I suppose after the night we've had, missing one morning won't hurt." 30 minutes later, Alexander's private elevator opened directly into the executive floor of Thompson Tower. Emma gasped, taking in the sweeping views of Portland and the distant mountains visible through the glass walls. "You can see everything." "From up here," she exclaimed, pressing her hands against the window. "Look, Mom, there's my school. And the hospital where you work." Alexander watched her excitement, with an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. When was the last time he'd actually noticed the view? For years, it had been merely the backdrop against which he conducted business. As they walked through the executive floor, employees stopped and stared. Alexander Thompson personally touring someone through the offices was unprecedented. A child and a woman in a cafeteria uniform. Unheard of. Mr. Thompson, his executive assistant Diana, intercepted them outside the conference room. "The board is requesting a specific time for tomorrow's rescheduled meeting, and Mr. Harrington called 3 times about the Singapore acquisition." "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. And tell Harrington I'll call him this afternoon," Alexander replied, then gestured to his guests. "Diana, this is Emma Wright and her mother, Melissa. They're my special guests this morning." Diana recovered quickly, extending her hand with professional courtesy. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." In the executive dining room, the chef, personally, came out to take their order after receiving a call from Alexander's assistant. Emma ordered chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream, her earlier solemnity giving way to childish excitement. "Do you work here every day?" Emma asked Alexander as she arranged her napkin carefully on her lap. Most days, he confirmed, though much of my time is spent in meetings or traveling to our other offices. Do you like it? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Alexander opened his mouth to deliver his standard response about the rewards of building a successful enterprise, then stopped. The truth was, he hadn't considered whether he actually enjoyed his work in years. It had simply become what he did. Parts of it, he answered honestly. I enjoy solving problems and building things that last, but some days it's just meetings and paperwork. Emma nodded sagely. Mom says that's true about most jobs. The trick is finding one where the good parts make the boring parts worth it. Alexander glanced at Melissa, who was carefully spreading her napkin, clearly uncomfortable in the opulent surroundings, but maintaining her dignity. Your mother sounds very wise. She is, Emma agreed earnestly. She works really hard so I can have opportunities she didn't have. That's why she takes extra shifts, even though she gets tired. Melissa flushed slightly. Emma, Mr. Thompson doesn't need to hear about our personal lives. Actually, Alexander said gently, I find it refreshing. Most people I meet either want something from me or are trying to impress me. Honest conversation is rare in my world. Breakfast arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. As they ate, Alexander found himself studying mother and daughter. Despite their obvious financial struggles, there was a bond between them that spoke of deep love and mutual respect. Melissa had clearly raised her daughter with values that transcended their circumstances. Honesty, gratitude, dignity. When was the last time Alexander had experienced that kind of genuine connection with another human being? After they finished eating, Alexander gave them a brief tour of the executive floor. Emma was fascinated by everything, asking questions about the various departments and what they did. In the main conference room, she walked around the massive table where billion-dollar decisions were made daily. This is where all the important people sit? She asked, running her small hand along the polished surface. The board of directors and executive team, yes, Alexander confirmed. Emma climbed into the chair at the head of the table, Alexander's chair, and folded her hands seriously, mimicking what she imagined a business meeting looked like. I call this meeting to order, she announced solemnly, then broke into giggles. Alexander found himself laughing with her, a genuine laugh that felt foreign but wonderful. Melissa watched them both, a small smile playing on her lips despite her obvious discomfort in these surroundings. As they prepared to leave, Alexander's gaze fell on the framed mission statement hanging on the wall. Words he'd crafted 20 years ago when founding the company, Thompson Enterprises, building value through excellence and innovation. Corporate jargon that said nothing about people, community, or genuine human connection. In his office, while Diana arranged for a car to take Melissa to work and Emma to school, Alexander found himself studying another photograph on his desk, himself. And cutting the ribbon at the opening of Thompson Tower 5 years ago, he stood alone, surrounded by buildings, but no people. A perfect metaphor for his life. Mr. Thompson, Emma interrupted his thoughts. I wrote something for you. She held out a piece of Thompson Enterprises notepaper, covered in careful third-grade handwriting. Alexander accepted it, reading the simple message. Dear Mr. Thompson, thank you for helping me when I was scared. Thank you for letting me sleep at your house and for breakfast. I hope my dollar makes you happy when you are sad. Your friend, Emma Wright. Below the message, she had drawn a picture of Cleo, surprisingly accurate for a child's drawing. Emma, we need to go, Melissa called from the doorway where she stood with Diana. Mr. Thompson has work to do, and I can't be late for my shift. Alexander carefully folded the note and placed it in his pocket. Of course, the car is waiting downstairs. He walked them to the elevator, aware of the curious stares from his employees. Alexander Thompson personally escorting visitors was unprecedented. "Thank you again," Melissa said formally as the elevator arrived, "for everything." "It was my pleasure," Alexander replied, surprised to find he meant it completely. Emma hugged him suddenly, wrapping her arms around his waist. This time, his response was less awkward, more natural as he returned the embrace. "Don't forget to look at your dollar when you're having a bad day," Emma reminded him, stepping back. "I won't forget," he promised. As the elevator doors closed, Alexander stood motionless, feeling strangely bereft. The entire encounter, from finding Emma in the park to this moment, had lasted less than 24 hours, yet it had affected him more profoundly than any experience in recent memory. Back in his office, Alexander cancelled his remaining morning meetings and sat at his desk, staring out at the city below. He pulled out Emma's crumpled dollar bill, smoothing it carefully with his fingers. A single dollar, less than what he spent on a minute of his lawyer's time, less than the cost of the coffee beans in a single cup of his morning espresso. Yet, in that moment, it felt like the most valuable thing he owned. He opened his desk drawer and removed a seldom-used letter opener to carefully slit the frame holding his MBA diploma. Sliding the prestigious document out, he replaced it with Emma's dollar bill, resealing the frame and hanging it back in its prominent position on the wall. His phone buzzed with messages from board members, his legal team, the VP of operations, all demanding his attention on matters involving millions of dollars. Alexander silenced the phone and continued staring at the framed dollar. For the first time in decades, Alexander Thompson wasn't thinking about acquisitions, stock prices, or profit margins. He was thinking about a little girl who had nothing, yet had given him the only thing she possessed, and about what that meant about the life he had built for himself. Something had to change. He just wasn't sure what or how. But the single-dollar bill in its expensive frame would serve as a reminder that he needed to find out. 3 days had passed since Emma and Melissa Wright had walked out of Alexander's office, yet thoughts of them continued to intrude on his normally focused mind. During board meetings, conference calls, and strategic planning sessions, he found himself wondering how Emma was doing in school, whether Melissa had managed to find reliable childcare, if they had enough to eat. "Mr. Thompson," Diana's voice pulled him back to the present. She stood in his office doorway, tablet in hand. "The Foundation Board is requesting your input on the annual giving priorities. They need a response by end of day." The Thompson Foundation, his charitable arm, created primarily for tax benefits and public relations purposes. Alexander had always delegated the actual decision-making to the Foundation's board, approving their recommendations with minimal input. "What are they considering this year?" he asked, surprising Diana with his interest. "The usual sectors: arts, education, medical research." She consulted her tablet. "They're debating between funding a new wing at the Art Museum or increasing STEM scholarships at Portland State." Alexander frowned. Worthy causes, certainly. But how many lives would they actually change? What about supporting working families? Emergency childcare, housing assistance, that sort of thing. Diana blinked, thrown by the unexpected suggestion. "I don't believe those areas are on their radar, sir. The Foundation has traditionally focused on institutional giving." "Tell them I want a new proposal," Alexander said firmly. "I'd like to see options for programs that directly assist working families struggling to make ends meet, specifically single parents." Diana made a note, her professional demeanor not quite hiding her surprise. "Yes, sir. Anything else?" Alexander hesitated, then made a decision. "I'd like you to find out something for me. Portland General Hospital, the cafeteria staff, what are their working conditions like? Hours, benefits, childcare resources, particularly for those working night shifts." If Diana found the request odd, she was too professional to show it. "I'll gather that information. Should I tell them who's asking?" "No," Alexander said quickly. "Just a general inquiry. And Diana, I'd appreciate your discretion on this." After she left, Alexander turned to the window, watching the late afternoon sun glint off the neighboring buildings. His gaze drifted to the framed dollar bill, now hanging where his MBA had once been proudly displayed. Something Emma had said during their breakfast kept returning to him. "Mom says the trick is finding a job where the good parts make the boring, and parts worth it." When had his own work stopped being worthwhile? When had the satisfaction of building something meaningful been eclipsed by the relentless pursuit of more wealth, more power, more acquisitions? His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Harrington is on line 1 about the Singapore deal." Alexander picked up the phone, forcing himself back into CEO mode. "David, what have you got for me?" "Good news, Alex." Harrington's voice boomed through the speaker. "They've agreed to our terms. We can acquire Meridian Tech for 18% below market value. Their leadership is desperate after the last quarter's losses." 6 months ago, this news would have given Alexander a rush of satisfaction. Another victory, another company brought under the Thompson Enterprises umbrella. Today, his first thought was, how many employees would lose their jobs in the streamlining that would inevitably follow? "Alex, you there?" Harrington prompted. "Yes, and sorry, that's good work, David." Alexander forced enthusiasm into his voice. "But before we finalize, I want a complete report on their employee base. Who we'd keep, who we'd let go, severance packages, transition assistance." "Severance packages?" Harrington sounded confused. "We usually leave that to HR after the acquisition is complete." "Not this time," Alexander said firmly. "I want to see the human cost before we move forward." After ending the call, Alexander sat back in his chair, surprised by his own words. The human cost had never been his primary concern before. Efficiency, profitability, market share. These were the metrics that had driven his decisions for decades. What had changed? A small voice in his head, one that sounded remarkably like Emma's, answered simply, "You have." The next morning, Alexander took an unprecedented step. He cleared his schedule for the day. No meetings, no calls, no urgent business. Matters. He needed time to think. Dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a sweater that felt foreign after years of tailored suits, he took Cleo for a walk through a different park, one near Portland General Hospital. As they strolled, he observed the people around him with new eyes. Harried parents rushing children to school, healthcare workers heading to or from shifts, elderly couples on benches enjoying the morning sun, real people with real lives, not just economic units in some grand corporate scheme. Alexander found himself approaching the hospital complex, Cleo trotting contentedly beside him. Without consciously deciding to do so, he entered the building and followed signs to the cafeteria, finding himself in a large, institutional space filled with staff in various uniforms, patients, and visitors. He scanned the serving area, not entirely sure what he was looking for, until he saw her, Melissa Wright, in a hairnet and cafeteria uniform, efficiently serving breakfast items to the line of hungry hospital workers. Alexander hung back, observing. Melissa worked quickly, but still managed a smile and brief greeting for each person. Even in the unflattering uniform, even obviously tired, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that he found himself admiring. When the morning rush subsided, Melissa stepped away from the serving line, wiping her hands on her apron. Alexander approached cautiously, suddenly unsure why he had come. "Mr. Thompson." Melissa spotted him before he could retreat, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's fine," he assured her quickly. "I was just walking nearby and thought I'd stop in." Her eyes narrowed slightly with understandable suspicion. Billionaires didn't typically just stop in at hospital cafeterias. "I was actually hoping to talk to you," Alexander admitted. "When You have a break, of course. I don't want to interfere with your work. Melissa glanced at the large clock on the wall. I have 15 minutes at 9:30. But Mr. Thompson... Alexander, please. Alexander, she corrected, the name sounding awkward on her lips. I'm not sure what we have to discuss. Emma and I are very grateful for your help the other night, but it's not about that, he interrupted. Well, not directly. It's something else I'd like your perspective on. Melissa studied him for a moment, then nodded. The courtyard. Outside has benches. I'll meet you there at 9:30. 20 minutes later, they sat on a bench in the hospital's small courtyard garden. Alexander had purchased coffee for both of them from the cafeteria kiosk, remembering belatedly that Melissa probably knew it wasn't very good. So, Melissa began, hands wrapped around her cup more for warmth than refreshment. What does a billionaire want with a cafeteria worker's perspective? There was no malice in her tone, just genuine curiosity tinged with wariness. Alexander took a deep breath. I'm considering making some changes to how my foundation allocates resources. I've realized we may be missing opportunities to make real, meaningful differences in people's lives. And you're asking me because you live in the real world, Alexander said simply. I don't. Not anymore. I live in boardrooms and penthouses and executive dining rooms. I make decisions that affect thousands of lives without ever seeing the actual people involved. Melissa's expression softened slightly. That's surprisingly self-aware. Emma, help me see some things more clearly. At the mention of her daughter, Melissa's face brightened. She hasn't stopped talking about visiting your office. She told her entire class about it during show and tell. Alexander felt an unexpected warmth at the thought. She's a remarkable child. You've done an amazing job with her, especially under difficult circumstances. We manage, Melissa said, her guard rising again slightly. That's actually what I wanted to ask you about, Alexander continued. If resources were available, what would make the biggest difference for families like yours? Working parents trying to make ends meet? Melissa considered the question seriously. Reliable, affordable childcare is probably the biggest challenge, especially for those of us working non-standard hours. After that, housing costs and healthcare. What about your employer? Does the hospital provide any support? Melissa shrugged. Some. There's a child care center, but it closes at 6 p.m., which doesn't help those of us on evening shifts, and it's still expensive on a cafeteria salary. The conversation continued, with Melissa providing insights into challenges Alexander had never had to consider. The logistics of using public transportation when you work irregular hours. The impossibility of saving for emergencies when every dollar is allocated to immediate needs. The constant stress of being one sick day or car repair away from financial crisis. I'm sorry, Melissa said suddenly, checking her watch. I need to get back to work. My break ended 5 minutes ago. Of course, Alexander stood quickly. Thank you for speaking with me. You've given me a lot to think about. As Melissa turned to leave, she hesitated. May I ask why this matters to you now? You've been successful for years without concerning yourself with people like me. The question was direct, but not unkind. Alexander considered his answer carefully. Because Emma gave me her last dollar, he said finally. And it made me realize I've spent decades accumulating wealth without understanding its true value, or lack thereof. Melissa studied him, seeming to assess his sincerity. Emma has that effect on people. She sees the world differently. She helped me see it differently too, Alexander admitted, and I'm grateful for that, more than I can express. As Melissa hurried back to work, Alexander remained in the courtyard, mulling over their conversation. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with corporate acquisitions or profit margins. He pulled out his phone and called Diana. I need you to set up a meeting, he instructed. With the foundation board, my financial advisors, and the head of HR, and find me the best consultant on corporate social responsibility in the country. We have work to do. You want to do what? Richard Blackwell, chairman of the Thompson Foundation Board, stared at Alexander as if he'd suggested burning down the building. 2 weeks had passed since Alexander's conversation with Melissa in the hospital courtyard. 2 weeks of deep reflection, research, and planning. Now, seated at the head of the conference table, surrounded by his foundation board members, financial advisors, and executive team, Alexander was proposing changes that had rendered the normally eloquent Richard temporarily speechless. I want to redirect 60% of the Foundation's annual budget toward programs that directly impact working families, Alexander repeated calmly. Emergency childcare centers that operate 24/7 for essential workers, housing assistance programs, education and job training initiatives. But the art museum wing, Richard sputtered, the symphony endowment. These are prestigious projects that enhance the Foundation's, and by extension your, standing in the community. They're vanity projects, Alexander corrected gently. Beautiful, culturally significant vanity projects, but they don't address the most pressing needs in our community. Margaret Chen, his longtime financial advisor, leaned forward. Alexander, while I appreciate your sudden interest in social welfare, redirecting funds of this magnitude requires careful consideration. The tax implications alone are manageable. Alexander finished for her. I've had the financial team run the numbers. Yes, we may lose some tax advantages compared to our traditional giving model, but the Foundation will remain financially sound. This is unexpected, said Diane Waters, head of HR for Thompson Enterprises, but potentially quite impactful. Alexander nodded gratefully at her support before continuing. Additionally, I want to launch a comprehensive review of our corporate practices, starting with employee compensation across all levels. The CEO of Thompson Enterprises' largest subsidiary choked on his water. You mean raising salaries? Alex, our labor costs are already... I'm talking about living wages, Alexander interrupted, particularly for our service staff, maintenance workers, and entry-level positions, and family-friendly policies like flexible scheduling, remote work, options where feasible, and on-site childcare at our major facilities. The room erupted in a chorus of objections, concerns, and warnings about shareholder value and competitive positioning. Alexander let them talk, observing the faces around the table with new clarity. These were smart, accomplished professionals who had helped build Thompson Enterprises into the powerhouse it was today. But they were also people who, like himself until recently, had become disconnected from the realities of ordinary working people's lives. When the noise subsided, Alexander spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. I understand your concerns. They're valid from a traditional business perspective, but I'm asking you to consider a different perspective. He reached into his pocket and withdrew Emma's dollar bill, which he'd removed from its frame for this meeting. This dollar represents everything I've been missing in how I approach both business and philanthropy. Alexander recounted his encounter with Emma in the park, her night in his penthouse, and her parting gift. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. Several board members, particularly those with children or grandchildren, seemed moved by the story. One little girl's gesture made me question the values driving my decisions, Alexander concluded, not just personally, but in how this company operates. I've built tremendous wealth, but at what cost? And to what end? These are the questions I'm wrestling with now, and I'm asking you to join me in finding answers. Richard cleared his throat. It's a touching story, Alexander, but you can't restructure a billion-dollar enterprise based on sentiment. It's not sentiment, Alexander countered. It's perspective. For too long we've made decisions that maximize profit while minimizing human considerations. I'm proposing we find a better balance." The discussion continued for hours, with Alexander patiently addressing concerns, considering suggestions, and occasionally conceding points where the opposition raised legitimate issues. By meeting's end, while not everyone was convinced, Alexander had secured tentative support for at least exploring his proposed changes. "This is just the beginning," he told Diana as they walked back to his office afterward. "There will be resistance. Every step of the way. Change always faces resistance," she replied thoughtfully, "especially when it challenges the status quo." She hesitated before adding, "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is remarkable." "Thank you," Alexander said, surprised by how much her approval meant to him. "I'll need allies in this effort." "You have at least one," Diana assured him with a smile. That evening, Alexander found himself driving toward the east side, an area of Portland he rarely visited despite owning several properties there. Using the address he'd obtained from hospital records with Diana's discreet assistance, he located the apartment building where Melissa and Emma Wright lived. The 4-story brick building was clean but clearly aging, with worn carpeting in the lobby and chipped paint on the stairwell walls. No elevator, Alexander noted as he climbed to the 3rd floor. How did residents manage groceries, laundry, or children up these stairs daily? He hesitated outside apartment 312, suddenly questioning the wisdom of his unannounced visit. Would Melissa think he was checking up on them, invading their privacy? Perhaps this was a mistake. Before he could retreat, the door opened, and Emma stood there in pajamas, decorated with planets and stars, a math workbook in hand. "Mr. Thompson!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine delight. "Emma, who's at the—" Melissa appeared behind her daughter, surprise registering on her face. "Alexander, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he assured them quickly. "I apologize for dropping by unannounced. I should have called first." "We don't have your number," Emma pointed out practically. "Are you here to visit us? Did you bring Cleo?" "Emma," Melissa chided gently. "Mr. Thompson probably just needed to discuss something quickly." "Actually," Alexander said, "I was hoping to talk with both of you, but I can come back another time if this isn't convenient." Melissa hesitated, then stepped back. "Please come. We just finished dinner. I can make coffee." The apartment was small but meticulously kept. The living room doubled as a dining area, with a small table still covered with homework papers. Modest furnishings showed signs of wear, but were arranged with care. What struck Alexander most were the personal touches: Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, family photos on the walls, bookshelves filled with well-read volumes. Despite its size and simplicity, the apartment felt more like a home than his penthouse ever had. "I'm sorry about the mess," Melissa apologized, quickly gathering Emma's school materials from the table. "Please don't apologize," Alexander said. "Your home is lovely." Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Want to see my room? I have all my books organized by subject, and Mom let me paint one wall blue for the ocean." "Emma," Melissa intervened, "let Mr. Thompson sit down first. Remember what we discussed about overwhelming guests." "It's fine," Alexander assured her with a smile. "I'd love to see your room, Emma." The tour took approximately 30 seconds, as Emma's bedroom was barely large enough for a twin bed, a small desk, and a bookshelf. But she displayed her space with unmistakable pride, showing Alexander her science fair medal, her collection of rocks found in the park, and a detailed solar system mobile hanging from the ceiling. "Dad helped me make that before he died," she explained matter-of-factly. "He said I could be an astronaut if I studied hard enough." He was right, Alexander replied, noticing the photograph of a uniformed serviceman on her nightstand. "Your father sounds like a wise man." When they returned to the living room, Melissa had prepared coffee and set out a plate of cookies. "Nothing fancy," she apologized. "Emma and I baked them yesterday." "Homemade cookies are the best kind," Alexander said, accepting a slightly misshapen chocolate chip cookie that proved to be delicious. As Emma settled on the floor with her math homework, Melissa turned to Alexander with a questioning look. "So what brings you to our neighborhood?" Alexander took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we last spoke about my company, my foundation, my life priorities, and I've started making some changes." He outlined the meeting he'd had earlier that day, the resistance he'd encountered, and his determination to forge ahead despite it. "That's ambitious," Melissa said carefully. "But why are you telling us this?" "Because it started with Emma," Alexander said simply, "with her dollar, and because I'd like your input as I develop these programs. Your real-world perspective would be invaluable." Melissa set down her coffee cup. "I'm flattered, but I'm not sure what I could contribute to your corporate planning." "More than you realize," Alexander assured her. "For instance, the child care center I'm proposing. What hours would actually help working parents with non-traditional schedules? What services beyond basic supervision would make a meaningful difference? These are questions someone like me wouldn't know to ask." As they talked, Emma occasionally chimed in with surprisingly insightful observations from her perspective as a child in a working-class family. Her comments about feeling different from classmates who had more material advantages particularly struck Alexander. The evening passed quickly, evolving from a formal discussion into a comfortable conversation. Alexander found himself sharing stories from his own childhood, his father's repair shop, their modest apartment above it, the financial struggles they'd faced after his mother left. Stories he rarely revisited and never shared. "It sounds like you understand more than I gave you credit for," Melissa admitted as the evening drew to a close. "I misjudged you." "I've spent years making it easy for people to misjudge me," Alexander replied. Creating distance was safer somehow. Emma, who had been quietly listening from her spot on the floor, looked up. "Is that why you were crying when I gave you my dollar? Because nobody had been nice to you in a long time?" The directness of her question pierced through Alexander's carefully constructed explanations. "I think," he said slowly, "it was because your generosity reminded me of who I used to be, before success changed me." As Alexander prepared to leave, Emma handed him a folded piece of paper. "I drew this for you, for your office." The drawing showed 3 figures, Emma, Melissa, and Alexander, holding hands beneath a large sun, with Cleo at their feet. Above them, Emma had carefully printed, "New friends." "Thank you, Emma," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll put it in a special place." Walking back to his car, Alexander felt lighter than he had in years. The path ahead would be challenging, restructuring his business practices, redirecting his foundation's focus, facing continued resistance from those invested in the status quo. But for the first time in decades, he felt he was moving in the right direction. Emma's dollar had been the catalyst, but something greater was emerging from that small beginning. A reclamation of purpose, of connection, of humanity itself. "What? Do you mean the Portland Times wants to interview you?" Alexander asked Diana, looking up from the stack of financial projections he'd been reviewing. 3 months had passed since his evening at Melissa and Emma's apartment. 3 months of gradual but significant changes at Thompson Enterprises and its foundation. While some board members had resigned in protest, others had embraced the new direction with surprising enthusiasm. And now, apparently, the media had taken notice. "They're doing a feature on corporate social responsibility," Diana explained. "Your initiatives have caught their attention, particularly the 24-hour childcare center that opened last month at Portland General." The childcare center had been Alexander's first completed project, a state-of-the-art facility adjacent to the hospital that provided free care for children of hospital employees working overnight and weekend shifts. The funding model was innovative, Thompson Foundation covered construction costs and start-up expenses, while a partnership between the hospital and local businesses ensured operational sustainability. "I don't want this to become a PR exercise," Alexander said firmly. "This isn't about polishing the Thompson image. The reporter specifically mentioned that angle," Diana replied. "She's interested in why you've changed your approach so dramatically. She seems genuinely curious, not looking for a puff piece." Alexander considered this. He'd avoided publicity around the changes he was implementing, preferring to work quietly. But perhaps sharing the story might inspire other business leaders to reconsider their own practices. "All right," he agreed reluctantly, "but no photographs, and I want to review the article before publication." "Already negotiated those terms," Diana confirmed with a smile. She'd also like to interview some beneficiaries of the programs, with their consent, of course. Alexander nodded, his thoughts immediately going to Melissa, who had been instrumental in shaping the childcare center's policies. Her insights about scheduling challenges, transportation issues, and what parents really needed had proven invaluable. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal. Over the past months, Alexander had become a regular visitor at the Wright apartment, sometimes bringing dinner, other times just stopping by to discuss new ideas or bring Emma books about space and science that he thought she might enjoy. Melissa had initially been wary of his continued presence in their lives, concerned about creating false expectations for Emma or becoming the focus of charity. But Alexander had been careful to approach their friendship with respect for her independence and dignity. "I'll speak with Melissa about the interview," he told Diana, "but it's entirely her decision whether to participate." That evening, Alexander found himself in the Wright's small kitchen, helping Emma with her science project while Melissa prepared dinner. These informal, domestic moments had become surprisingly important to him, an anchor in his rapidly changing life. "So the solar panels convert sunlight directly into electricity," Alexander explained, helping Emma position a small photovoltaic cell in her model. "No moving parts, no pollution." "And it can power anything?" Emma asked, her focus intense as she carefully connected wires to a tiny motor. "Well, this small one can only power very small devices. But large solar farms can generate enough electricity for thousands of homes." "Like clean energy," Emma said, repeating a concept they'd discussed previously. "Mom says we need more of that for the future." Alexander glanced at Melissa, who was stirring pasta sauce while listening to their conversation with a small smile. These moments felt so natural now, so right, in a way his previously ordered life never had. "The Portland Times wants to do an article," he mentioned casually as Emma tested her solar-powered windmill in the patch of sunlight coming through the window, "about the new initiatives at Thompson Enterprises." Melissa looked up, instantly, alert. "What kind of article?" "Feature piece on corporate social responsibility." "The reporter is interested in the why behind the changes." He hesitated. "She'd like to interview some of the people involved in developing the programs." "You mean me?" Melissa said, her expression cautious. "Only if you're comfortable with it," Alexander assured her. "I've made it clear this isn't a publicity stunt, and you have absolute veto power over anything published about you or Emma." Melissa turned down the heat under the sauce, considering. "Would it help? The programs, I mean. Would publicity bring more support?" "Potentially," Alexander acknowledged. "It might encourage other businesses to adopt similar models, but that's not a reason for you to do it if you're uncomfortable." Emma looked up from her project. "Mom, can I be in the article too? I want to tell them about Mr. Thompson crying when I gave him my $1. Alexander laughed, no longer embarrassed by that emotional moment. "I'm sure the reporter would love that detail, Emma." "I'll think about it," Melissa promised, reaching for plates. "But first, dinner is ready." As they ate at the small kitchen table, Alexander marveled at how comfortable this had become. These simple family dinners in a modest apartment, so different from the business meals and solitary evenings that had characterized his life for decades. Later, as Emma worked on finishing touches for her science project, Alexander and Melissa sat on the small balcony overlooking a neighborhood park. The spring evening was mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I've been offered a new position," Melissa said suddenly. "Hospital administration wants me to join the Employee Advocacy Committee. Paid position, daytime hours, benefits." Alexander turned to her, genuinely pleased. "Melissa, that's wonderful. You'll be perfect for it." "It's because of the work I did on the childcare center," she admitted. "Apparently my unique perspective impressed the administration." "Your unique perspective has been reshaping my entire company," Alexander said with a smile. "I'm just glad the hospital had the wisdom to recognize your value." Melissa studied him in the fading light. "This is real, isn't it? All these changes you're making. It's not just a phase or a crisis of conscience that will pass." "It's real," Alexander confirmed, "though I won't pretend it's been easy. The board is split. Some shareholders are threatening legal action if quarterly profits continue to decline. But others are starting to see the long-term vision, which is," Alexander considered the question carefully, "a company that measures success not just by financial metrics, but by human impact, by how it strengthens communities and improves lives." He paused. "It sounds idealistic, I know. It sounds necessary," Melissa countered, "and long overdue in the corporate world." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Melissa spoke again. "I'll do the interview, if it helps advance. What you're trying to accomplish, it's worth stepping outside my comfort zone." "Thank you," Alexander said simply. "Your perspective matters in this story." The interview took place the following week in a conference room at Thompson Tower. Jessica Reeves, the reporter, was thorough but respectful, asking thoughtful questions about the evolution of Alexander's business philosophy. "You've been known for decades as one of Portland's most ruthlessly efficient CEOs," she noted. "What prompted such a dramatic shift in your approach?" Alexander glanced at Emma, who sat nearby, drawing pictures while the adults talked. "Let's just say I received a gift that changed my perspective on what really matters." "The dollar bill in the frame behind your desk?" Jessica asked perceptively. Alexander nodded, sharing the story of finding Emma in the park that October night. With Melissa's permission, he explained how that chance encounter had led to a profound reassessment of his life's work and values. "So a child's generosity essentially transformed a corporate empire," Jessica summarized. "Emma showed me what I'd forgotten," Alexander replied. "That business isn't just about transactions and profits. It's about people, relationships, building something meaningful together." When Melissa joined the conversation, describing her initial skepticism of Alexander's intentions and her subsequent involvement in developing programs that addressed real needs of working families, Jessica's interest visibly deepened. "Did you ever worry about how this relationship might be perceived?" she asked candidly. "A billionaire taking sudden interest in a single mother and her daughter." "Every day at first," Melissa admitted with a small smile. "I was suspicious of his motives, concerned about creating dependency, worried about Emma getting attached to someone who might not stay involved. But over time," she glanced at Alexander, "his actions proved more meaningful than any words." "Could have. And how would you describe your relationship now?" Jessica asked, looking between them. Alexander and Melissa exchanged a glance, a moment of silent communication that spoke volumes about the growing connection between them. "We're partners," Alexander said finally, "in this project of reimagining what business could be, but also in something more personal, a friendship that has become increasingly important to us both." Melissa nodded in agreement, her expression soft but reserved. Some aspects of their evolving relationship remained private, too new and precious for public discussion. Emma, who had been listening while pretending not to, looked up from her drawing. "Are you going to put in the article that Mr. Thompson comes for dinner almost every night now, and that he reads me stories about space, and that Mom smiles all the time when he's here?" Jessica laughed, while Melissa blushed slightly. "Would you like me to include those details, Emma?" "Yes," Emma said decisively, "because they're important. Mom says it's important to tell the whole story, not just parts of it." "Your mom is very wise," Jessica agreed, turning off her recorder. "Thank you all for sharing your story with me. I think our readers will find it quite compelling." After the reporter left, Alexander, Melissa, and Emma went to the executive dining room for ice cream, a tradition they'd established for special occasions. As Emma debated between chocolate and strawberry, Alexander watched her with Melissa, feeling a profound sense of contentment he'd never experienced in all his years of corporate success. "What are you thinking?" Melissa asked, noticing his expression. "I'm incredibly fortunate," Alexander replied honestly, "to have found the two of you, to have been given a chance to see the world differently." "We're the fortunate ones," Melissa countered softly. "You've changed our lives too, you know." Emma, having finally selected a combination of both flavors, rejoined them with her elaborate ice cream creation. "Miss Reeves said our story is going to inspire people. Do you think it will?" Alexander considered the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a chance encounter in a dark park to a complete reimagining of his life's purpose and meaning. "I hope so, Emma," he said sincerely. "But even if it only inspires a few people to reconsider what really matters, that would be enough. It seems we have a situation, Mr. Thompson." The voice of Lawrence Bennett, Thompson Enterprises' chief legal counsel, was grave as he stood in Alexander's office doorway 6 months after the Portland Times interview. The article had sparked exactly what Alexander had hoped for: a broader conversation about corporate responsibility, but had also created unexpected complications. "What kind of situation?" Alexander asked, setting aside the proposal for a new scholarship program aimed at children of service workers. Bennett placed a thick folder on Alexander's desk. "Several major shareholders have filed a lawsuit claiming breach of fiduciary duty. They're arguing that your recent initiatives prioritize social impact over profit maximization, violating your obligation to act in shareholders' best financial interests." Alexander had anticipated this possibility. Some board members had warned him that his reforms were moving too quickly, alienating traditional investors who cared only about quarterly returns. "The timing is suspicious," Alexander noted, glancing through the complaint. "Our Q2 financials are due next week, showing our first quarter of positive growth since the changes began." Bennett nodded. "I suspect they're trying to get ahead of that news. If the market responds favorably to our numbers, their position weakens considerably." "Options?" Alexander asked, his years of business acumen automatically assessing the tactical situation. "We fight it, obviously. The law doesn't actually require maximizing short-term profits at the expense of long-term sustainability. We have solid precedent. On our side," Bennett hesitated, "but it will be messy, public, and potentially damaging to the very initiatives you've been building." Alexander considered this, gazing out the window at the Portland skyline. 6 months of determined effort had begun to show promising results. Employee turnover had decreased significantly. The child care center at Portland General had expanded to serve additional healthcare workers. A housing assistance program for service employees had launched in partnership with local banks. Most importantly, a new corporate culture was slowly emerging, one focused on sustainable growth and community impact rather than naked profit-seeking. "How serious a threat is this?" Alexander asked. "If we lose, They could force a return to previous business practices, possibly even remove you as CEO, Bennett said bluntly. But I don't think we'll lose. I think they're hoping you'll compromise to avoid the fight. They don't know me very well then, Alexander said with a grim smile. After Bennett left, Alexander reached for his phone to call Melissa, then hesitated. Their relationship had deepened considerably over the past months, evolving from friendship into something more profound. They hadn't put a label on it yet, but Alexander found himself consulting her on both personal and professional matters, valuing her practical wisdom and moral clarity. But this was different. This was a corporate battle that could potentially affect her and Emma if things went poorly. Would sharing these concerns be burdening her unnecessarily? Before he could decide, his phone rang with Melissa's number on the screen. "I was just thinking about calling you," he answered, his voice automatically warming. "Great minds," Melissa replied. "Listen, Emma's science project was selected for the district showcase this weekend. She's over the moon and specifically requested that you attend, if you're available." "I wouldn't miss it," Alexander promised, his legal troubles temporarily forgotten. "What time?" "Saturday at 10. Portland Community College is hosting." She paused. "Everything okay? You sound distracted." Alexander considered deflecting, then opted for honesty. "Some shareholders are suing to force a return to our old business practices. Nothing we can't handle, but it's a nuisance. Because of the changes you've made, the community programs. Essentially, yes. They claim I'm neglecting my duty to maximize their returns." Melissa was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to talk about it? Emma's at a friend's house until dinner. I could meet you somewhere." 30 minutes later, they sat in a small coffee shop midway between Thompson Tower and Portland General. Alexander had changed from his business suit to casual clothes, a habit he'd developed recently when meeting Melissa outside of formal settings. "So these shareholders," Melissa said after Alexander explained the situation, "they're upset because you're building something sustainable rather than squeezing every possible dollar out of the company right now." "That's the essence of it," Alexander confirmed, though they're dressing it up in legal terminology about fiduciary responsibility. "And are they right? Legally, I mean?" Alexander shrugged. "It's a gray area. Courts have generally given executives latitude to determine what's in a company's long-term best interests. But it depends on the judge, the specific circumstances." Melissa studied him over her coffee cup. "You're worried." "Not about the legal case," Alexander admitted. "Bennett is confident we can win that. I'm more concerned about the disruption, the potential impact on the programs we've built. Negative publicity could scare off partner organizations. So what will you do?" Alexander hadn't realized how much he needed this conversation until they were having it. Melissa didn't offer empty reassurances or simplistic solutions. She listened, asked incisive questions, helped him clarify his own thinking. "Fight, obviously," he said finally, "but I'm considering a more radical approach as well." He outlined an idea that had been forming in his mind, a restructuring of Thompson Enterprises into a benefit corporation, a legal entity that explicitly balanced profit with social and environmental impact. "It would require shareholder approval," he explained, "but if successful, it would permanently embed our new approach into the company's legal DNA." "Could you win that vote?" Melissa asked practically. "Currently, no. But if our next quarterly results show what I think they will, that our new approach is actually strengthening the company financially, we might have a chance." As they talked through options, Alexander felt the weight lifting from his shoulders, not because the challenges had disappeared, but because facing them alongside someone who understood both the business realities and the human stakes made them feel manageable. "Thank you," he said as they prepared to leave, "for listening, for understanding." Melissa reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture that still sent a small thrill through him. "That's what partners do," she said simply. Saturday morning found Alexander, Melissa, and dozens of other parents and supporters at Portland Community College for the district science showcase. Emma stood proudly beside her display, an elaborate model demonstrating solar energy applications for urban buildings, complete with working miniature solar panels that powered tiny LED lights. "The angle of the panels is crucial for maximum efficiency," Emma explained confidently to the judges, her knowledge far exceeding typical fourth-grade understanding. "In Portland's climate, we need to account for our many cloudy days by optimizing collection during available sunlight hours." Alexander watched her with undisguised pride. Over the past 9 months, he had witnessed Emma's transformation from a solemn, prematurely responsible child to one who still maintained her remarkable maturity, but now felt free to express childlike enthusiasm and joy. "She's amazing," he whispered to Melissa as they observed from a short distance. "She's had good influences," Melissa replied, her hand finding his. "Your encouragement of her interest in science has made a huge difference." After the judging concluded, with Emma winning second place overall, they celebrated with lunch at her favorite pizza place. As Emma chatted excitedly about the other projects she'd seen and ideas for next year's competition, Alexander found himself marveling at how thoroughly his life had changed since that October night in the park. The Thompson penthouse, once a showcase of solitary luxury, now contained evidence of frequent visitors, children's books on the shelves, a dedicated drawer for Emma's art supplies, family photographs alongside corporate awards. Even Cleo had transformed from an aloof companion to an exuberant playmate whenever Emma visited. More significantly, Alexander himself had changed. The driven, isolated businessman who measured value solely in financial terms had evolved into someone who recognized the profound worth of human connection, of contributing meaningfully to others' well-being, of being part of a community rather than above it. And it had all begun with a crumpled dollar bill from a child who had nothing to spare but gave anyway. "Earth to Alexander," Melissa's voice broke through his thoughts. "Emma asked you a question." "Sorry," Alexander said, focusing on Emma's expectant face. "What was the question?" "I asked if you still have my dollar," Emma said, taking a bite of pizza. Alexander smiled. "Of course I do. It's in a special frame in my office. Everyone who comes in asks about it." "And do you tell them the whole story?" Emma asked, her expression suddenly serious. "I do," Alexander confirmed. "I tell them about finding a remarkable little girl in the park who taught a supposedly successful man what really matters in life." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good, because that's the important part, not the dollar itself." "Definitely not the dollar itself," Alexander agreed, exchanging a warm glance with Melissa. As they finished lunch, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from Bennett. "Quarterly numbers finalized, exceeding projections across all divisions. Call me." The news was promising for their legal battle, but Alexander didn't immediately return the message. Instead, he suggested they take advantage of the beautiful spring day, with a walk through the nearby botanical gardens, Emma's second favorite place after the Science Museum. As they strolled among the blooming flowers, Emma skipping ahead to examine particularly interesting specimens, Melissa slipped her hand into Alexander's. "Whatever happens with these shareholders," she said quietly, "you've already succeeded where it matters most." "How do you figure?" he asked. "Look around you," she replied, "at what you've helped build in less than a year, the childcare center serving hundreds of families, the housing program, the scholarship foundation, and most importantly—" She nodded toward Emma, who was carefully photographing a butterfly with the camera Alexander had given her for her birthday. "A child who believes in possibilities again." Who knows that even when things seem darkest, unexpected kindness can change everything? Alexander squeezed her hand gently. She's not the only one who's learned that lesson. As the golden afternoon light filtered through the trees, Alexander Thompson, once defined solely by his wealth and power, felt rich in ways no balance sheet could measure. The shareholders might win their lawsuit. The benefit corporation proposal might fail, but they couldn't take away what truly mattered: the human connections, the sense of purpose, the joy of contributing to others' well-being. One small dollar had indeed changed everything, not through its monetary value, but through the priceless lesson it represented, that genuine wealth wasn't what you accumulated, but what you gave away, and that sometimes the most profound gifts came from those who had the least to spare, but the most to teach about generosity, courage, and the transformative power of simple human kindness. 1 year to the day after Alexander had found Emma sitting alone on that park bench, a crowd gathered in Madison Park for the unveiling of a new community center. White chairs filled the grassy area, community leaders mingled with local residents, and a podium stood ready on a small platform before a building facade covered with a large cloth. Alexander stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching as people arrived. A year ago, he would have been the center of attention at such an event, shaking hands, accepting praise, always aware of how each interaction might benefit Thompson Enterprises. Today, he was content to observe the genuine excitement on the faces of those who would benefit from the center. "Nervous?" Melissa asked, appearing at his side in a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes. "A little," Alexander admitted. "Public speaking has never bothered me before." "It's different when you actually care about the message," Melissa said, understanding as always. "Where's Emma? Helping the other children with the ribbon. She's taking her responsibilities very seriously." Melissa laughed. "Of course she is. Everything is very serious business with her lately." The Madison Park Community Center represented the most ambitious project yet in Alexander's transformed approach to business and philanthropy. Located in the heart of one of Portland's working-class neighborhoods, it combined a 24-hour childcare facility, job training center, affordable housing assistance office, and health clinic, all under one roof and available on a sliding scale. Fee basis. The funding model was equally innovative. Thompson Enterprises had provided the initial capital and land, while ongoing operations would be supported through a unique partnership between local businesses, community organizations, and a small endowment established by the Thompson Foundation. "It's time," Diana approached, clipboard in hand. "The mayor just arrived and the press is ready." Alexander nodded, straightening his tie, one of the few formal elements remaining in his increasingly casual wardrobe. "Is everyone in position?" "For the surprise, all set," Diana confirmed with a conspiratorial smile. "Melissa, you should take your seat up front." As Alexander moved toward the platform, he passed the park bench where he had first encountered Emma. The original had been replaced with a new one bearing a small plaque, "Where kindness changes lives." Few people knew the significance of those words, but they would, after today. Mayor Eleanor Chen welcomed the crowd and spoke briefly about the importance of public-private partnerships in addressing community needs. Her speech was followed by remarks from community leaders, each highlighting different aspects of the center's services. Finally, it was Alexander's turn to speak. As he approached the podium, he saw familiar faces in the audience. Richard Blackwell, who had initially opposed his changes, but eventually become a key ally. Lawrence Bennett, whose legal expertise had been crucial in defending the new direction against shareholder challenges. Hospital administrators who had partnered on healthcare initiatives, and most importantly, dozens of families who would benefit from the center's services. "Good afternoon," Alexander began. "1 year ago today, I was walking through this very park with my dog, Cleo, following the same path I'd taken hundreds of times before. I was, by conventional standards, a successful man. Wealthy, powerful, respected in business circles. I was also profoundly alone, disconnected from what truly matters in life. He paused, his gaze finding Emma in the front row beside Melissa. That evening I encountered a remarkable young person who changed everything. Not with grand gestures or wise pronouncements, but with a simple act of generosity that forced me to confront what I had become. Alexander recounted the story of finding Emma their night at his penthouse, and the transformative moment when she had offered him her only dollar. That dollar! He reached into his pocket and carefully removed the framed bill he'd brought. For this occasion, represented everything I had forgotten about human connection, about what gives life its meaning. This child, who had so little in material terms, showed me what true wealth looks like, the capacity to give of yourself, even when it costs you something. The crowd was silent, many visibly moved by the story. When I cried that day, it wasn't from sadness. It was recognition of how far I had strayed from understanding what really matters. Emma's gift began a journey that has led directly to this moment, to this place, to a completely different understanding of what success means. Alexander turned toward the covered building behind him. The Madison Park Community Center is not named after me, though Thompson Enterprises provided the funding. It's not named after any corporation or wealthy donor. Instead, it bears the name of this community because it belongs to you, was designed with your input, and exists to serve your needs. He gestured toward Emma, who stood now with a group of children holding a ceremonial ribbon. But there is one element that recognizes the catalyst for this transformation. Emma, would you and your friends do the honors? As the children cut the ribbon, the large cloth covering the building's facade fell away, revealing a beautiful mosaic above the entrance. The artwork depicted diverse hands of all sizes and shades joining together to form a community with a single dollar bill at its center, a subtle but meaningful tribute to Emma's gift. The crowd applauded as Alexander continued. The Right Family Center for Children will provide not just childcare, but early education, mentoring, and health services. It is named in honor of Emma Wright and her mother, Melissa. Not because they asked for recognition, but because their impact on this community deserves to be celebrated. Emma's jaw dropped in surprise as she turned to her mother, who looked equally stunned. This detail had been kept secret from them both. The legal battle with shareholders is over, Alexander announced. Last week, by a margin of 63%, our shareholders voted to officially convert Thompson Enterprises into a benefit corporation, legally obligating us to consider social and environmental impact alongside profit in all business decisions. More applause interrupted him, louder this time. This victory belongs to all of you who believed in a different way of doing business. To the employees who embraced new priorities, to the community partners who trusted our commitment, to the customers who supported our vision with their purchasing choices. Alexander's voice softened as he continued, and it especially belongs to two people who taught me that true success isn't measured in dollars, but in lives improved, communities strengthened, and relationships built. He gestured for Melissa and Emma to join him at the podium. As they made their way forward, Cleo bounded ahead to greet them, her enthusiasm drawing laughter from the crowd. When they reached his side, Alexander placed an arm around each of them, no longer concerned with maintaining professional distance or public personas. Their journey together had transcended such considerations. 1 year ago, a child gave her last dollar to a man who had everything but understood nothing, Alexander said, his voice rich with emotion. Today, that man is blessed beyond measure, Not with more wealth, but with purpose, community, and love. He turned to Emma. Would you like to say something? Emma nodded, stepping forward with the confidence she had developed over the past year. When I gave Mr. Thompson my $1, I wasn't trying to change anything. I just wanted to say thank you because he was kind to me when I was scared and alone. She smiled at the audience. My dad used to tell me that little things can make big differences if they come from your heart. I guess he was right. As Emma rejoined them, Melissa stepped forward. When Alexander first entered our lives, I was suspicious, she admitted candidly. People with wealth and power rarely understand the challenges faced by those without such advantages. But Alexander didn't just listen, he acted, not with charity that creates dependency, but with partnerships that build dignity and opportunity. She gestured toward the new center. This represents what's possible when business recognizes its role not just as a profit generator, but as a community member with responsibilities to the people it serves. The Wright family is honored to have played some small part in this transformation. After the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed to tour the new facilities, Alexander, Melissa, and Emma walked together to the bench where their story had begun. Cleo bounded ahead, investigating interesting scents in the grass. Her silver, fur now showing hints of grey. You named it after us, Emma said, still processing the surprise. The Children's Center. It seemed fitting, Alexander replied, since you were the inspiration for all of this. I still can't believe you kept that secret, Melissa said, shaking her head with a smile. I thought we told each other everything. Now. Almost everything, Alexander agreed, his expression turning suddenly serious. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. There's one more thing I haven't told you yet. Melissa's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Emma gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth. Alexander knelt on one knee beside the bench where everything had begun. Melissa Wright, you and Emma have transformed my understanding of what matters in life. You've shown me that true wealth comes from connection, compassion, and love. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears filled Melissa's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Alexander. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma launched herself at both of them, creating a three-person embrace that represented everything Alexander had once lacked and now treasured beyond measure. Later that evening, as they celebrated with a small gathering of close friends at Alexander's penthouse, now filled with family photographs, children's artwork, and the warm evidence of lives genuinely shared, Diana presented them with a gift, a beautifully framed photograph of Emma, offering her $1 to Alexander, captured by a security camera in his office and preserved by an observant IT technician who had recognized its significance. Beneath the image was inscribed a simple truth that had changed not just one life, but an entire community. The most valuable things in life aren't things at all. As Alexander looked around at the gathering, at Emma excitedly showing her friends the view from the terrace, at Melissa chatting with Mrs. Reynolds about wedding plans, at business associates and community partners mingling as equals, he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found success that mattered, all because a little girl, with nothing to spare but kindness, had given her last $1 to a crying millionaire who had everything and nothing at all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.